Hi, welcome to Stump the Pastor. Today's question comes from David in Texas. He asks, I asked Reverend Carol West this question once when I was working as a therapist at her church in Fort Worth. Jesus was crucified on Friday. The Bible says that he rose from the dead on the third day. Wouldn't Sunday, the day he rose from the dead, be only the second day? Well, thanks for the question, David. Actually, this is a question that has been pondered for centuries, actually. This is one of those questions, though, that stumps us in a little bit different way than some of the other questions we get on Stump the Pastor, because it involves the biblical text logic. Now, remember again, and I say this a lot on Stump the Pastor, that the Gospels were written decades after the events they describe. And even though we treat the Gospels as eyewitness accounts, they were the oral stories of the faith communities long before they were ever written down. And that is why we have 4 Gospels that don't always agree on details. They each tell the story differently, and they all tell it differently than Paul tells it. So biblical scholars have had a problem with things like the 3 days resurrection stories for the same reasons that David does. When we think of 3 days, we normally start with now until this time tomorrow as one day. That's a 24-hour period. So if today is Friday, for example, then tomorrow makes one day, Saturday. Sunday is day 2, so Monday would be day 3. And when speaking of the resurrection, we even have Matthew's gospel telling us that Jesus said that like Jonah in the belly of the fish, he will spend 3 days and 3 nights before the resurrection. But then we have Paul's account of the Last Supper and crucifixion, and he uses the term third day. So some have read Paul's version as meaning Friday, crucifixion day, is day 1, Saturday is day 2, and Sunday is day 3. So this all then gets further complicated when hundreds of years later, the church is putting together the liturgical calendar to mark the important events in Jesus' life, and also the full biblical reading as much as possible, so that in a 3-year period of time, we get to hear 3 of the Gospels, and then we get to hear big chunks of the Older Testament, the Psalms, and the other New Testament writings. So that liturgical calendar then put Good Friday as the day of crucifixion, and Sunday, which is always a day of resurrection every week, that Sunday became Easter. So the liturgical calendar followed Paul instead of the Gospels and used third day instead of 3 days. So instead of thinking the resurrection is supposed to happen in 3 days, the liturgical calendar made it fit into a weekend. Now, the truth is that we don't know what day Jesus was crucified. I mean, the Gospels don't tell it the same way. Some say it's Passover Eve, some say it's Passover. And there are no concurrent historical records from elsewhere that note the day that this particular crucifixion happened. And remember that Romans crucified people all the time. So this particular crucifixion didn't stand out from any of the other hundreds or perhaps thousands that the Roman government imposed. So in the Gospels, we have these different stories about the tomb, the witnesses, what they saw when, and so forth. But what we have in common in these Gospel stories, these stories of good news, is that the disciples were forever changed by their experience of Jesus' life and his ministry. And they saw the hand of God upon everything he did and said. In fact, it was so remarkable that all of them describe it as life-changing. And they brought new life out of this message of an unjust state execution's attempt to silence the message of Jesus. And that message that Jesus had was resisting the Romans' murderous and unjust presence in Judah and Israel. And one bonus moment here. Although we celebrate Easter as the day of Jesus' resurrection, literally every Sunday is a celebration of resurrection. In fact, even during Lent, the season when we look at more of the passion and the death of Jesus, Sundays during Lent are all resurrection days. Hope this helps, David. See you next week on Stump the Pastor. So thanks for the question, David, and give my regards to Reverend Carol West, an old colleague of mine from my Dallas days. She is the pastor of Celebration Church in Fort Worth now. If you have a question that you would like to ask me, send it to me at the email address on your screen. See you next time on Stump the Pastor.